Imagine spending hours getting ready for a glamorous party. Your silk dress is perfect. Your gloves are spotless. Your hair took 2 servants and half the afternoon. And then, your jewelry starts moving. Because in the 1890s, some fashionable American women weren't wearing diamonds. They were wearing live lizards. Tiny reptiles chained to dresses, pinned to bodices, and proudly displayed as luxury accessories. Yes, real animals, alive. And somehow, this was considered elegant. But the weirdest part? People didn't think this trend was ridiculous. They thought it was sophisticated. And by the time America realized how insane it was, thousands of these tiny creatures had already flooded cities, leaving behind one of the strangest fashion disasters in history. This is why it absolutely sucked to wear live lizards as jewelry. Let's go back to America in the 1890s. Fashion was becoming a spectacle. Wealthy women weren't just trying to look beautiful anymore, they were trying to look unforgettable. The late Victorian world loved extravagance. Huge dresses, elaborate hats, feathers, layers, accessories. Everything had to attract attention. And if everyone around you already wore expensive clothing, you needed something even stranger to stand out. That's when an unusual trend crawled into fashion. Literally. Small green lizards began arriving in cities from the American South. Vendors sold them as exotic little creatures, but they didn't market them as pets. They marketed them as fashion. Women bought them, attached tiny collars around their necks, hooked chains to them, and wore them like living brooches. Imagine entering a ballroom, and instead of a jeweled pin on your chest, there's a tiny reptile staring back at everyone. And somehow people looked at this and thought, brilliant. But the trend got even stranger. Because sellers weren't just offering lizards, they were selling a fantasy. These animals were often advertised as chameleons, and the claim was incredible. They supposedly changed color to match women's outfits. Imagine hearing that in the 1890s. A living accessory that magically adapts to your clothing. Victorian fashion had basically invented mood jewelry, except it was alive. Now, most of these weren't true chameleons at all. Many were ordinary little lizards. But by then, the marketing had already worked. Women loved the idea. Owning one made you seem exotic, sophisticated, fashion-forward. It was like carrying luxury that moved. Except luxury usually doesn't try to escape. Because there was one enormous problem with live jewelry. It was still alive. These weren't gemstones. They had legs, instincts, minds of their own. The lizards crawled, moved unexpectedly, turned at random. Imagine trying to maintain perfect Victorian posture while your accessory starts climbing toward your shoulder, or worse, your neck. One moment you're the picture of elegance. The next you're trying not to panic because your brooch just changed direction. Suddenly fashion became survival. And the more people used them, the more ridiculous situations appeared. Women pinned them onto bodices, attached them to clothing, even displayed them on decorative cushions inside homes. Tiny collars, tiny chains, tiny prisoners. The line between fashion and pet had completely disappeared. Except nobody treated them like pets, because pets get care. These were accessories, and accessories are replaceable. That became the darker side of the trend. Many owners had absolutely no idea how to care for reptiles. Remember, this was the 1890s. No internet, no reptile guides, no exotic pet stores. People barely understood these animals. Women bought them because they looked fashionable, not because they knew how to keep them alive. Many owners reportedly didn't know what they ate, how much water they needed, how to keep them healthy. Imagine buying living jewelry and realizing you accidentally adopted an animal. Victorian fashion had unintentionally turned style into responsibility, and many people were not ready for it. The result? Animal welfare groups started noticing, and they were horrified. Soon, organizations stepped in and called the trend cruel. Think about what these animals were experiencing. Tiny collars, chains, pinned onto fabric, carried around in public, handled like ornaments. The image that once looked elegant suddenly looked disturbing. The same society that admired these creatures started questioning them. Stores selling fashion lizards began facing pressure. Authorities got involved. Sales started stopping. New York moved against the trend. And that should have ended the story, but it didn't. Because now America had a new problem, a ridiculous problem, a problem nobody expected. There were already thousands of lizards in circulation. Reports from the time mention around 10,000 reptiles already present. 10,000! Think about that. This wasn't one strange rich lady. This was a full fashion craze. An entire city had embraced living accessories, and now nobody knew what to do with them. Imagine being the official who had to solve this. What is our reptile situation? Sir, approximately 10,000 fashion lizards. History is unbelievable sometimes. And somehow, the story still wasn't over, because people kept trying. Years later, reports appeared again. Young women were still using lizards as decorations, this time in their hair. Yes, hair. Imagine spending hours styling an elaborate hairstyle and adding a reptile as the final touch. The result was exactly what you'd expect: chaos. One story described a girl at a dance wearing one of these creatures in her hair. A man leaned in close. The lizard loosened and dropped straight into his mouth. Imagine explaining that to your friends afterward. Victorian romance had reached its peak absurdity. At that point, the universe itself was begging people to stop. But maybe the strangest part of all this is that live lizard jewelry wasn't even the only bizarre trend. Victorian fashion had a strange obsession with turning nature into decoration. People wore insects, decorated hats with animals, used real creatures and accessories. Nature wasn't something to admire anymore, it became something to wear. And in a strange way, the lizard trend perfectly captures the entire era. The Victorian world was obsessed with beauty, status, spectacle, looking extraordinary. Sometimes so obsessed that people stopped asking a simple question: should we do this? Because once fashion starts chasing attention, logic leaves the room. And apparently, lizards enter it. Imagine being a wealthy woman in the 1890s. You buy the newest trend. You proudly wear your living jewelry. People stare. You feel elegant, sophisticated, unique. Then suddenly, your accessory moves. Everyone notices. The illusion breaks. And now your luxury item is trying to run away. That is the entire tragedy of this trend. Fashion promised elegance. Reality delivered chaos. It promised sophistication. Reality delivered reptiles. It promised beauty. Reality delivered 10,000 abandoned animals and public embarrassment. All because people wanted something different, something unforgettable. And they definitely got it. Because over 100 years later, we're still talking about the time America decided jewelry wasn't alive enough. Victorian fashion gave us giant skirts, dangerous corsets, towering hairstyles, and somehow still looked at all that and said, "You know what this outfit needs? A lizard."